All right, Mods, give me the thumbs up. Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for our fourth part in our Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion webinar series. My name is Everil Ben Eaton, and I'm the Membership Director at the Greater Wilkes-Barre Chamber. Just a few housekeeping items before I pass it over to our sponsor, PNC Bank, for a brief video and a few comments. All attendees will be in listen-only mode. To be respectful of everyone's time, we have allotted time at the end for questions and answers. Feel free to ask a question at any time during the presentation by submitting them in the question and answer section or the chat box. This event is being live streamed on Facebook. For anyone watching on Facebook, please enter your questions in the comment section and we'll make sure we get to them too. A recording of today's session will be available on our Facebook and YouTube pages by early next week. If you registered in advance, we'll make sure that we get that out to you. And then last, if anyone is interested in joining our Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Council or staying up to date on our efforts, please visit our Get Involved tab on our website. To get started, let's see a brief video from PNC Bank, and then we'll hear from Matt Pugh at PNC, who will introduce our speakers for today.
Make today a new you had it in you day. Make today a we need a bigger trophy case day. Make today a learning the basics day. Make today a finally going in on season tickets day. No matter the day, PNC has the financial tools and technology to help. PNC Bank. Make today the day.
Sorry, I couldn't get my mute button to go off there for a second. Well, on behalf of everyone at PNC, I'd like to welcome everyone to today's webinar. At PNC, we do embrace and promote diversity and inclusion as a core element of our values and culture. When the Chamber approached us late last year about getting involved in their inaugural Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Conference, we immediately signed on as a sponsor. When COVID sidelined the in-person event that was planned for April, Lindsay and Ben at the Chamber did an excellent job transitioning the commitment to ongoing conversation about greater inclusion and equal opportunities to this virtual webinar series. As recent events have illustrated, we all have a role and responsibility to create more opportunities for positive understanding and change. So thank you all for taking the time today to prioritize diversity, equity, and inclusion. It is my pleasure to introduce our speakers today. Our speakers are Jennifer Hetro and Kerri Price. Jennifer Hetro is a marketing and business consultant working with a diverse range of clients to support their marketing, branding, and communication needs. Currently, Jenny also serves as the executive director of the Back Mountain Chamber, a nonprofit membership organization formed to promote business, economic growth, and community. She is a graduate of College Misericordia, now Misericordia University, and has held marketing and leadership positions at some of the region's most recognizable employers. Jenny lived in the world before the quote-unquote Ellen on-air kiss and has watched nursing mothers come back to work without appropriate considerations, breaks, and support. She's energized by so many organizations' efforts to truly become more diverse, shifting from having a written diversity policy tucked away in employee handbooks to authentic and visible strides towards inclusion. Her interest in diversity is supported by incredible friends and colleagues who are willing to share their lived experiences and knowledge. She's always learning and is eternally grateful to her favorite resources and teachers. Kerri Price currently serves as a senior manager of campaign operations for MNG Health. Kerri holds a master's degree in management from Harvard University, a bachelor's degree in English literature from Rowan University, and is currently pursuing her doctoral degree in business administration. Her passion for diversity comes from within. As a member of the LGBTQ+ community, and from her experiences on boards and leadership teams of community organizations, she has experienced firsthand the importance of diversity and inclusion initiatives in the workplace and beyond. Together with past and current employers, Kerri works to continually break down barriers of misunderstanding with the goal of identifying the ROI behind multicultural workforces. And with that, I'll turn it over to Jenny and Kerri.
Thank you so much for that introduction, Matt, and thank you to the Chamber for putting this on. We're really excited to be here today and have a little conversation about what it is to be an ally in a world where supporting friends and family can be a little bit dicey sometimes. And so we're excited to get started.
All right, again, I echo Kerri's sentiments. Thank you so much for putting this together and for having us. We're going to start with, aside from our bio, right? Who are we? Professional women doing all the things, right? We're all trying to find our own way in this crazy world. We are former colleagues and became trusted friends when I hired Kerri at the Wright Center for Community Health. I actually intended to hire somebody different, and then I met her in her interview and I was like, oh boy, can't not hire that one. So through our time there together, working very closely, we literally worked in a 9-foot by 9-foot box with one door and no windows. It was like we were on top of each other, literally and figuratively, and really became trusted friends. You learn a lot by being with somebody all the time, and luckily we really were able to develop a foundation of not only a great working relationship, but a really respectful platform of trust that has thankfully evolved. And now that we're no longer working together in that capacity, it's really nice to still maintain connected. We are living our own unique experiences, and we really want to share them with you. And we're not always going to get it right. Okay, so that's kind of where we're at. That's our disclaimer for this presentation. We really want to just share some thoughts and real life experiences, and hopefully that resonates with you, and there might be a couple takeaways that you can put into action at the end of this 35 minutes today. All right. We are not experts. You'll hear us reiterate this throughout the presentation. We are also not your single source of truth, okay? We are not formally trained in diversity and inclusion, and we are not available for autographs yet. Maybe once COVID clears, we might be more willing to do that. But I will say we also do work and respond very well to snacks. So if you'd like us in the future, we are available to work for snacks and sugar. All right. Whoops.
All right, so before we dive into allyhood, I think it's important that we take a look at some of the root of what allyhood is really based on, and that's identity. So we all have multiple identities. We're never just one thing, right? I know that I personally am an academic. I'm a daughter to 2 awesome parents, and I'm a member of the LGBTQ community. And all of these and many, many more are things that have shaped how I work, how I communicate, and how I have built friendships with people like Jenny, who have very different identities from me.
So, part of my identity, and we self-identified, we didn't cheat. I almost tried to, but I couldn't. I'm a working mother. I'm recently sober, which is kind of crazy. A lot of people know me as super fun and wild, and I was, believe me. But I've changed a lot over in just a year. So that's something that is newly identifiable to me and the people who know and love me. And also activist, which if you don't know what that is, that's somebody who actively promotes, women's rights in the workforce in regards to breastfeeding and nursing, and, really coming back and finding your new space as somebody who needs time and space to nurse their baby and still wants to, be themselves too at the same respect. All right. I'm going to turn this over to Kerri.
We want to dive into what we call the guessing game. So we're going to see on the screen 7 people, and they all have something in common. Go ahead and try to figure out what it is. They will be asked questions, and some will step forward and appreciate that identity and identify with it, and others will not. But all the while they're being asked questions, try to figure out what that identity that all 7 share is.
Premiere is my go-to. I love video editing. Human experience.
How it's going to work is you're going to say, if you're this, step forward.
Hello, beautiful people.
Hi, Kerri.
How you guys doing?
So you all have something in common, every single one of you.
You're all different, so it's got to be something on the inside.
I grew up in North Brunswick, New Jersey. Our claim to fame is that John Bon Jovi got kicked out of our high school.
My horoscope sign is Aries. I don't think it has any significance in my life.
My childhood was interesting. Mostly, outdoors, growing up on an island off of the coast, so it was very different.
Oh, step forward if you have asthma. had no idea. You guys can step back.
Step forward if you are all vegetarians. No, okay.
Step forward if you're a comedian. Ooh, not everybody though.
I currently go to school full-time.
I'm also a transgender recording artist. I sing, I rap, and things of that nature.
I love sports. I love comedy.
I have a cat, one cat named Sativa. I'll let you guess why I call her that.
I mean, it's 2018. It's legal. Say, step forward if you smoke weed. Ooh. We'll all talk later, guys, but let's reset, let's reset.
Step forward if you're single. Wow, okay, almost, okay.
Step forward if you think Elf is the best movie ever made. Okay.
We're in Hollywood, so step forward if you've been on TV. Ooh, almost everybody, close.
Step forward if you're anemic.
Step forward if you have had any sort of cancer before. Damn, I don't think I'm gonna get it.
It feels like a tingling, like pins and needles when your fingers go numb or you laid on your arm too long. It feels like that, but in my chest.
I think I hide it pretty well, but it definitely affects my life. Not so much anymore. I think I have it under control now.
Step forward if you're an only child. Oh wow, makes sense.
You know.
When I do tell people, it just kind of catches them off guard because what I do for work, they see me as like an extrovert.
It's like there's a creature picking at you all the time.
This is actually something that people deal with from day to day, but the fear of being open about this, they keep it a secret.
Yeah, I give up. I give up. I don't know what this is about.
Step forward if you have anxiety. Oh, is that it?
Yeah.
That's it? Freaking nailed it.
Really?
Congratulations, guys, you're worried. I'm kidding, I have it too.
I was diagnosed with generalized anxiety disorder, which is just an easy way to say, we're not sure, you just feel bad all the time.
My diagnosis is general anxiety disorder.
My anxiety is a little bit different maybe than your average generalized anxiety because I actually got diagnosed with PTSD several years ago after an incident of sexual assault.
They did diagnose me with anxiety, a little bit of social anxiety, and depression.
I'm diagnosed with general anxiety disorder.
I've struggled with anxiety for pretty much all of my life.
I thought it was depression, and it's a bit of depression, but it's mostly I have high anxiety.
People around me are always surprised that I have anxiety because I grew up in a hair salon, so I was constantly around people. I grew up kind of as an only child. In a way, I love attention. I'm always willing to perform, but I have a time limit.
You know, it's not something that I talk about publicly all the time. People probably don't see the stress and the anxiety and the panic that is often, you know, right below the surface.
That's really brave for you guys to share on a BuzzFeed platform. You look beautiful. Good love and good energy to all of you guys.
It doesn't matter where you're from or what you do or who you like, anyone could have anxiety.
I feel like my life would be easier in a lot of ways if I didn't have to live with it, but I also feel like everything that's a part of you makes you who you are.
I think that we should begin to create a safe space to normalize things like this so that people won't feel so ashamed of getting treatment and getting help.
Get in here, guys. Yes. Good hug, guys.
All right, so that was a pretty interesting video. And, you know, when Kerri and I were talking about what we could show, we thought that was something that might be a little bit different than, you know, people would expect, right? And clearly there's a lot of things that are very visible with people, and there's also a lot that lives under the surface, and there's a lot of things that people don't always just kind of come out and say to you, but those things are a really big part of everybody's identity. Has all of these different components. And, you know, we're going to go to our next slide, but one of the things that we found really interesting when we were picking that video was all of those random things that people were asking, like, do we have this in common? Do we have that in common? And some were serious, some were more funny. But everybody had that one thread that you wouldn't specifically know when you just gave them a first glance or maybe even a cursory conversation.
And as Jenny advances the slide, it's actually something that we didn't know that we had in common. We are also both anxious beings, and that is something that, of course, shows up sometimes more than others, but it's not something we wear on our sleeves. We're here, we're talking as a panel to many people. Thank you all for being here. But we are not typically extroverts. In some ways we are, in some ways we're not. And so some of these identities that we have, that other people have, and people who you come into contact with daily have identities that you may not see for a very long time. Jenny and I have known each other for 5 years, and it only came to surface maybe a year or two ago. But that's, I guess, part of our evolving friendship identity, is that we keep finding more things in common.
And, you know, as Kerri alluded to, we see ourselves on the screen right now. Everybody else is kind of non-existent. We're like speaking to a void here. So we are a little bit more anxious today than usual, but we're also very, very grateful for you joining us and, you know, trying to kind of navigate all these complexities with us. Okay. All right. This is a powerful slide, we think.
Yeah, definitely. Take a second to step back and imagine if somebody had the ability to either discredit or dismiss or diminish something that is a core facet of your identity. Just pick something that is core to who you are as a person, and imagine if somebody had the wherewithal to rightfully say, I don't believe that, I don't trust it, I don't support it. There are some things that are just known truths. The fact that I'm a daughter, and that's part of my identity, that's not one that's really up for debate. That's a fairly, ubiquitous concept. But things like being a member of the LGBTQ community are sometimes a bit more refuted, something that is a topic of conversation. But identity is something that is so personal that it's hard to negotiate the subjectivity of people's opinions, something that seems so objective to an individual.
And the other thing we, Kerri and I often talk about is, why are we so compelled to have an opinion about everything, right? Like, why are so many people so quick to say, I don't understand that. That's not true. You must be too sensitive, right? So, I mean, those are real pieces of humanity and who we are as human beings. And, when you get diminished and dismissed and people tell you you're just making things up, it's really powerful in a very, very detrimental way. And sometimes we don't even know we're doing it. And as Kerri and I said, we are not experts, and we certainly don't always get it right. And but it's a reality. And I can think of things right off the top of my head right now that I wish I had done differently or said differently or reacted to different things differently, that it really wasn't my place to have an opinion about it. So one of the things that we did when we were trying to put this presentation together is explore with some of our nearest and dearest friends, what does ally mean to you? And we didn't pose it in a certain way. It was like, what does ally mean to you? That was literally the question. And these are some of the responses that we got. A safe space where people can be their authentic self, someone who respects others and speaks out when there is injustice, someone who has your back. And the other one is a person who supports you, a confidant who is trustworthy and like-minded. And, obviously there were differing perspectives, and all of these people were different in their career, in their gender, all kinds of different backgrounds. But we thought these were a really fair representation of the general sentiment of, like, what does ally mean to a various group of people? Sorry, I'm a little anxious. I lost my mouse. There we are. Okay, Kerri, over to you.
Got it. Also in these conversations came up some of the things that allies commonly do, right? So it really boils down to 4 core groups, and that's listen, research, speak up, and understand. And they all sound like simple concepts, single words, single double words. But really, there's more behind each one of them. Listen, instead of just listening and taking something in, really means to understand, to take it in and seek out informed viewpoints that are differing, and look for both the ones that affirm your own viewpoint and the ones that refute it. And that comes to research. You have to find the credible sources and trusted friends that can help guide you through understanding a concept. And then once you understand, it's a matter of speaking up and advocating for those in your life who need it most. And it doesn't always have to be big grand gestures. It doesn't have to be, attending rallies or marches or writing to senators. It could be as simple as calling a friend and making sure that they know that you personally support them and that you're there for them. And of course, then is understanding. And a very core component of understanding as an ally is to make sure that in seeking understanding, you're not placing the onus of your own understanding on the person who is going to try to help you understand, right? So if you have a friend who is going through something, which I'm sure we all do, making sure that reaching out to them is in an effort to be there for them and not in an effort to advance your own understanding of what they might be going through.
That was one of the things that, really meant a lot to me when Kerri and I started to kind of have more open conversations. And, I'm not experiencing the same life situation that Kerri has. I've never had to come into work on a Monday, and when somebody asks me, what did I do over the weekend? I've never had to choose the right words that said, oh, I went out with my husband, or, I went out to dinner with my boyfriend. I never had to watch my words or try to navigate, do I really want to tell somebody who I'm seeing? Does it really matter? And, I felt like that is something that I would never understand. Will never understand that. But at the same time, Kerri wasn't there just to teach me, right? And while we had a really great foundation of trust and understanding and mutual respect, most people might look at me and say, oh, Jenny, you were Kerri's ally. You stuck up for her, which is kind of true, but kind of bullshit. Because really, when I needed help to understand things, my ally was Kerri. She was my safe space to say, hey, this might be an inappropriate question, but can I just ask you because I don't get it? Or I would like to learn more about X. Or you mentioned something in conversation and can you just explain it to me differently? And she could have certainly said, you're so ignorant. I can't even believe you'd ask me that. But instead, she became an ally to me without feeling like it was her job to teach me all the ins and outs of all the things that I didn't understand. So I would encourage people who, maybe if you're ever in a situation where somebody's asking you respectfully about some part of your identity that they quite don't understand, but maybe want to learn a little bit more about, it is easy to get defensive and it is easy to be so frustrated that I can't even believe you don't know this, right? But think about how your reaction can help propel that person to expand their knowledge and then maybe to get a little bit hungrier for more, right? Definitely. So again, while people might say, Jenny's an ally because she's a straight person, that is not the whole truth. It's a two-way street, guys, right?
Absolutely. One of the most powerful things that Jenny did, I'm not even sure if it was I'm actually pretty sure it wasn't intentional, was ask, before asking a question, do you mind if I ask you a question? And it's as simple as that. It was opening the door for, hey, I'm interested in having this conversation. I want to learn more. Do you mind if? And that gave me the ability to say, you know what, maybe not now. Or do you mind if we talk about this later? Or no, if it was a no. But asking simply, do you mind if I ask you a question about X, Y, or Z, opens the door to a very equitable conversation, gives everyone kind of equal respect and footing within that conversation, and allows for a more transparent, a more communicative, and probably a more productive conversation in the end.
So, who needs an ally? Literally everyone to varying degrees at varying parts of your life, right? We are human beings. We live and thrive on connection. I mean, sometimes we're all on connection overload right now, and it is nice to take a break. But, there are all these different parts of our identities that it really does help to have somebody who, to use the words of one of our people who answered the question, somebody who's on your side, somebody who has your back, somebody who wants you to be your best authentic you, no matter what that looks like. Okay? So one of the things we wanted to touch on today was specifically when you are in a position of influence, and that can mean you're a manager at your job, or you got promoted or something. Or it could mean, maybe you have a family and you influence your family. It could mean maybe you are a community leader or a board member, or maybe just in your own little circle of friends, maybe in your circle of family at Thanksgiving dinner, right? But when you are in a position of influence, truly, you have got to be conscious of your actions, your words, and your patterns, because they are being observed by others and they will be repeated. So, the standard by which you walk is the standard by which you accept, right? So really, you need to be so super aware of how you are reacting to situations and what are your patterns that you're very likely to repeat. Some patterns are great, some patterns not so great. Some patterns need to be broken, and that's not easy. So really think long and hard about what leadership means for you personally and professionally, because it is, dare I use the word privilege, but it is a privilege to be a leader and an influencer, no matter what that capacity is, and people are watching. So really, you've got to champion difficult conversations and find ways to be an ally in your world and your workplace, okay? So that, and that can mean varying things, right? I mean, obviously not all conversations in the workplace are easy as it is, right? But in a leadership position, you have got to be able to, as Kerri mentioned, listen, seek to understand, research, right? And really try to get a perspective that puts everybody at an equal, safe space, right? Where they can come to work or exist in your world without feeling threatened, right?
Absolutely. And as Jenny alluded to, you never know when you're going to be in a position of influence. And sometimes you're serving as an influencer and don't know it. The first thing that comes to mind is I had a chance to work at a day camp for the better part of 10 years. And I used to see about 80 kids in my swim groups every year come through. And I had the opportunity to work with a group of young boys who were right around middle school age and really figuring themselves out, figuring the world around them out. And trying to be cool, right? Every kid wants to be the leader of the pack. And there was one leader of the pack who was just he was a sweet kid. But everyone kind of looked up to him. He didn't know it though. He was just a genuine kid. And one day there were kids at the pool trying to throw words around that I'm not sure they fully understood. And one kid threw a slur out and said, "Right, Owen? Isn't that cool, Owen?" And Owen just deadpanned at him and said, "No, I don't like that word," and walked away. And he didn't know it, but those kids took that in. They were affected by that, and I didn't hear the word again. But Owen had no idea he was being an influencer. He was just being genuine. He spoke his truth, and he impacted the way that those kids were going to use that word moving forward. So you never know, and it's not always in the work environment, right? Anyone from a manager to a CEO to a kid at a day camp can be an influencer and have a big impact.
And the other thing I want to add to that is, a very close friend of mine had an experience where, she thought she overheard an employee make an inappropriate comment about another employee, and she wasn't quite sure, right? So what do? Do you say oh my gosh, did I make that up in my mind? But I kind of don't think I did. So she had a choice. She could ignore it and say, I probably didn't hear that. That was just too nuts. That somebody would never even say that. Or her choice was to pull that employee aside and say, hey, I know it was a bit muffled, but I believe I heard you say X, Y, and Z. And we need to talk about that because it's completely unacceptable. So we have these choices every time you are faced or put in a position where something feels dirty or wrong in your heart and your gut. And you have the choice to either address it or ignore it. Okay. And it's not comfortable. And sometimes it sucks. And sometimes you worry, am I going to offend somebody? Am I being too sensitive? Who am I to say something? All the traps, right? But leaders and people who are in positions of influence and people who other people look to and watch, probably everybody on this call, I mean, you wouldn't have dialed in if you didn't have an interest in this topic. So it's just a gentle reminder that this shit isn't easy, but it's up to people to step into that uncomfortable space. Okay. So what can you do? one of the things that was easiest for me to do was accept my own experience and limitations, right? Because I don't understand everything. So another thing to do is shift your perspective, right? Identify allies around you who can become your safe spaces and resources, okay? Because as we talked about, and as that, the video alluded, with all of those different pieces of identity, it's not always somebody who you can immediately recognize as somebody who can become a resource to you. You might not know for years. Some people don't reveal those portions of their identity openly. Sometimes it takes a long time for somebody to open up or share a personal story, or, be so willing to expose their innermost, identity facets. It's not just like an open book, right? Not everybody's an open book, unfortunately. So, the next thing we want to talk about is, like, you can be okay with not having all the answers, but please do not be okay with not finding the answers because it's uncomfortable. Okay? Kerri, you want to do the next two?
Sure, absolutely. I want to stress the one that Jenny just said, though. We live in a world where information is so readily accessible, which speaks to our next point, but we have the world of information at our fingertips via the internet. We have libraries, we have groups, virtual groups now, but we have groups that are dedicated to answering questions. We have groups like the Chamber who host events like this. We have so many community resources. We have the internet, which is a massive resource, but we have so many opportunities to learn and to not take advantage of them especially as Jenny alluded to, everyone on this call is here because they're interested in this topic. And if you're interested in this topic, there is no reason to not explore all of the ways in which you can expand your allyhood. And this is a great place to start. But never take one perspective as the only perspective, especially ours. As Jenny said many times over, we're not experts, but we've lived experiences, as have you. We've all lived a certain life experience that nobody else in the world has lived. Maybe people have lived similar lives, but never the exact same one. And so there's always a unique perspective in each resource.
And Kerri, I was hoping that maybe you could talk about the pride flags on the side of our slide, and that little story.
So there's an organization in Northeastern Pennsylvania called the NEPA Rainbow Alliance, and they put on LGBTQ events, and they support the LGBTQ community. And they have an event every year called Pride Fest. And about 4 years ago, the Wright Center, where Jenny and I have both worked at the time, was going to be participating in Pride Fest and hosting a table and providing resources. And the first year it was a relatively, small kind of grassroots showing, and it just kind of grew naturally over the next couple of years. And I think it was year 3 or so where Jenny and I kind of stepped in and said, let's make it big. Let's try to make this, the biggest showing that we can, and let's make sure that the LGBTQ community knows that we're here to provide, high quality, affordable healthcare. So we stepped in and said, how can we get volunteer people to come in and represent the organization, but also learn themselves. And so I believe Jenny had the idea to research a couple of pride flags, which was an awesome show of allyship on her part, and came to me and said, why don't we order a few? And I think a few turned into a few hundred. And a couple of days later, we had hundreds of pride flags just around our administrative offices. And it was a conversation starter that I don't think either one of us expected. We would have colleagues come over and say, what does that mean? And it was a great opportunity to tell them. And of course, there are many pride flags for many different identities. And I think we had maybe 5 or 6 floating around the office. But it started with conversations of, hey, what's that? To conversations of, I have a family member or I have a friend and I'm not sure how I can open this conversation with them. Do you have any ideas or resources? And so it went from, hey, we want to organize an event, to some really genuine, vulnerable conversations, and hopefully something that helps someone along the way. But we would have never had known that there was this opportunity if Jenny didn't say, hey, why don't we order some flags? And that's just a simple show of allyship that I'm not even sure was intentionally allyhood on Jenny's part, but it was something that she stepped out of her comfort zone to say, let's do this. And that, as an LGBTQ employee of Jenny's, was extremely meaningful, and something that I'm not sure, because as Jenny said, she hasn't lived my experience, I haven't lived hers, that I can even fully explain. But simple things like ordering flags or starting conversations or having those more vulnerable conversations can be extremely meaningful.
And the other thing that I want to talk about, when we decided to, really get involved with the Pride event was, I said to Kerri, I said, I want to bring my son. I want to bring my little guy. And he was about 1.5 at the time. And I was like, but I can't deal with him the whole time. Like, I'm going to bring my mother, right? So driving up there, I was like, Mom, this is going to be a very immersive experience for you. And you're going to be out of your comfort zone, right? Like, you might not understand things, and that's okay. And she was like, okay, I get it. No worries. So she goes there and, she's running around and trying to make sure that my son doesn't like jump into the wave pool, that montage. And she like left and was like, wow, like I've never experienced something like that. But it wasn't that she had, a negative connotation. But then I felt like, that was an experience that my mother never would have had, right? And I felt like it was really nice to just start opening those conversations with her and say, like, it doesn't matter if you don't understand, Mom. These are people, right? So again, I think it's just finding those small little victories where you can just be a decent person, right? But uncertainty traps can swirl in your head if you are not completely confident, right? Like, how many times at work are you almost afraid to start a project because it's not going to be perfect, because you've never done it before. It's not easy. It's not something that's in your wheelhouse all the time. So it's like, oh gosh, you're almost a little bit afraid to even start or open a conversation or do anything because you don't want to get it wrong, right? These are some of the things that I would think about all the time. Will I say the wrong thing? Is my question offensive? And, Kerri and I we really towed a line, because a lot of our conversations happened at the workplace, right? So it was this weird space of like, I don't want to be offensive, and especially not at work. So sometimes I wouldn't say things in the beginning just because I didn't want to get in trouble, right? Not only didn't want to get it wrong, I didn't want to get in trouble, and I didn't want her to quit and say, you're completely inappropriate. So the other ones, I'm no expert. Maybe I should just say nothing at all. Silence. Crickets. This one, Kerri, you want to take the next two? You love this one.
Sure. Yeah. And this, I guess, goes back to decision paralysis, right? I'm sure someone's going to say something at some point. I don't have to, right? There's a lot of people here. There's 8 billion people in the world. It certainly doesn't have to fall on my shoulders. Please don't do that. If you see something, say something. The old adage is true. It's because if everyone has that mentality, no one's going to say anything. And it takes bravery. It takes vulnerability. It takes stepping out of your comfort zone oftentimes to say something. And again, it doesn't have to be a grand gesture. It can be something as small as pointing out inappropriate behavior, or if you see something positive, saying like, hey, good job. Like, I'm glad you said that. That was really helpful. And then this last one, I was kind of offended, but then I figured that I'm probably just too sensitive. If it's offensive, it's offensive. And there's a good chance that if it offended you, it offended somebody else. Especially if it offended you and you're not sure why, because you're not part of the afflicted group. If it was offensive to you and you're not living that life experience that it would likely be offensive to, imagine how it must feel to somebody who is in that particular group who is afflicted.
And I really want to reiterate, diversity, this presentation is not just about LGBTQ, right? This presentation is about all kinds of underrepresented, minority groups. It's about people, with disabilities. It's about mothers who are, back in the workforce. It's about any kind of group or person or whatever facet of that identity could potentially feel marginalized or discredited or flat out trounced on. Okay. So try to keep that in mind as we move through it.
So imagine your privilege is a heavy boot, right? And it keeps you from feeling when you're stepping on someone's feet or when they're stepping on yours. Oppressed people have sandals on. So if somebody says, ouch, you're stepping on my toes, how would you react, right? If you have sandals on and somebody steps on you with a boot, you're going to feel it a lot more than if you're also wearing a boot or something more sturdy. Somebody who is in a point that is not in that point of privilege is going to feel it might be a little bit more raw or more vulnerable than you are in your position. So it's very important to recognize and understand that people are wearing different shoes, right? People have walked different places in those shoes. So be aware of the context of the conversations you're having and the discussions that you're involved in. And then be aware of a handful of these traps we just talked about withdrawing, but also think about centering yourself in your truth and in your reality, right? How often do we think, I'm a good person. Like I couldn't have said something like that, or I didn't mean to be offensive. Offense is subjective. So while offense might not be an intent, it can certainly be an outcome. So if somebody says, you know what, that really hurt me, sometimes it's humbling, but sometimes we have to take a step back and say, you know what, while I didn't intend for it to be hurtful, I can understand why that person is feeling that way. And it's not just that they're feeling that way, you know what, it was truly objectively offensive to this person. And then we're hearing this a lot in our current climate, the refusal to center on the impacted, the all toes matter disagreement when people are stepping on toes that have sandals on. We have to acknowledge that certain groups are living experiences that we do not and cannot understand from a third party's perspective. And watering down a very important identity discussion by saying that all things matter doesn't lend itself to productivity or reaching a point of being able to grow from the experience that is prompting the discussion.
And one thing that I want to add, it's, a personal experience that I had recently with a very good friend of mine who was working on a video for work with a team of people, and, worked on this video, was really excited about it, was really trying to be thoughtful about how to make it, diverse and inclusive, and she was really trying to do a good job along with the team of people. So she sends out this video and gets some feedback, tweaks it up a little bit, and, over the weekend gets an email from a senior executive who copied a bunch of people on an email and basically called her out for every single thing that she did wrong when producing this video, and all of the things that were offensive and all of the places where she got it wrong. So let's think about that for a second, right? She's a very sensitive, lovely person, and her first initial reaction was like, oh my God, I'm a terrible person. I am a terrible person. And then she went to, but I'm really not a terrible person. I really don't want to be a terrible person. I'm not a racist. I swear I'm not. But here's the thing, right? The person who gave her that feedback, although I would like to think it was well-intended, think about when you have to deliver a message like that to somebody, right? You can use that opportunity to really teach somebody and pick up the phone and call somebody, or deliver it in a way that could truly teach somebody and help them understand without specifically coming at them to tell them all the ways they got it wrong. And that's one of the things that I hope that as we become more a more inclusive society, that when there are opportunities to let people know that they maybe missed the mark or they could maybe be better, that the afflicted party can look at that and say, okay, well, how can I actually help them learn and make it better without forcing them to feel so terrible that they just shut down and they can't even deal with it. So that to me is like, how can somebody who is in that underrepresented group, how can they shift their focus and how can they become an ally for somebody who just got it wrong? Oh, and I do want to say on this slide, on the bottom of the slide, there is a beautiful resource that is called guide to allyship.com, because Kerri and I didn't make this all up by ourselves. It's a very good resource if you want to check that out. Okay. So how do you open and be receptive to productive conversations? So I want to take you back in our time machine to 5 years ago when Kerri and I met in our little shoebox of an office, and really talk about how did this all start, right? How did we become friends? How did this happen, right? So, and maybe Kerri, maybe you should talk about this one, because I don't even know how it happened, but I'm glad it did.
It's been a great 5 years, and I'm super happy it happened too. But we, from my perspective, as a young professional who had just recently relocated from out of state to northeastern Pennsylvania, found this job, was super excited to start, I was faced with that conversation that Jenny had mentioned earlier of, how do I answer the questions of what you do on the weekend, right? Because I was in a same-sex relationship. My pronouns that I would be using were she and not he. That's not the norm. You know, this is 10% or less of the population. So I am certainly not what you would expect of that conversation of how'd your weekend go. And so it was up to me to gauge Jenny's willingness to, like, I had to kind of put a pulse point on it and say, should I do this? Should I come out in a way that's going to make my conversations with Jenny moving forward about my weekends easier? Or for the amount of time that I work here, should I be changing pronouns? Because that's my choice, right? I can choose my choice and either decide to come out and make my life easier and or harder and take that risk, or I don't, and I go ahead and change pronouns as I've had in past experiences. And so the first week of working at the Wright Center was really just kind of figuring out how this was going to be. And thankfully, because Jenny is who she is, it was a very easy decision to make. But I could have ended up in a very different scenario, right? And a lot of people do. And I'm lucky enough that because of what makes me different, I had the opportunity to choose whether or not I wanted to disclose it. Whereas things like religion or race or things that are we wear on our sleeves sometimes, you don't have that option. So I'm in a position where my difference is something that I have a choice of whether or not to disclose, whereas other people do not have that choice. But I made the choice to disclose it. And I was so pleasantly surprised, and Jenny and I joke to this day that she always thinks she got her reaction wrong, and to me it was the ideal, it was everything I could have hoped for. She goes, okay, and that was that, and she walked away. I went, all right. And Jenny mentioned that she walked away from that conversation reflecting on it later and said, oh, maybe I should have reacted differently. And Jenny, you can speak to that, but for me, the indifference, that's the ideal answer. That's the best answer, because that's really honestly what a conversation about preference should be.
Yeah, and it's funny, you know, you think about communication and perception, and it's true. We were so busy that week and there was so much going on, and she told me, and I was like, all right, cool. Are we still gonna get that document finished today? Are you good? And I thought about it. Oh my God, I thought she just dropped such an important piece of information in front of me. And I was like, cool, all right. So I really was banged up about it later that day. I was like, I totally got that wrong. I was so disrespectful. I was so insensitive, which is hilarious because Kerri was like, wow, that was easy. So I thought I got it so wrong, and she thinks that I got it right. So it's so interesting how there can be such polar opposite sides of every single, you know, interaction with somebody. You might think it went one way and people may think it's another. And that, an important thing that we talked about earlier, like that doesn't mean that one of us is right and one of us is wrong. Those were our experiences and those were our perceptions, right? Intent is very different from, you know, actual receipt of information and perception. So as we talked about, you know, it was a really busy week for us when Kerri started. So I think we had this like really great foundation of trust right from the get-go. Like I was asked her to do things and she would do them. So it was just very, you know, transactional and work related in the beginning. But like vulnerability, right? You know, me saying to her, can I ask you these things, right? Or I don't understand that. Or is this offensive or not offensive? Or lots of questions on both sides, right? Like when Kerri told me that she was really grateful that I had no reaction because in Pennsylvania, this is 5 years ago, literally 5 years ago in Pennsylvania, you could fire somebody if you didn't feel comfortable with their sexual orientation. And I was like, what? That's nuts.
One of the most refreshing reactions was Jenny getting genuinely angry about that. And that to me, it wasn't, Jenny didn't have to say anything to me in that moment, except for, I could see it on her face that she was uncomfortable with that, with the truth that, you know, it wasn't a protected right at that time. And that genuine anger, no words, told me everything I need to know about how she feels about me, how she feels about the way that me and people like me are protected or not protected by the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania at the time. And it has since changed, but that genuine response of like, that is not right. That's a show of allyhood.
But I had no idea. You know, you talk about different lived experiences. I legit had no idea that that was a thing. And that was my ignorance. I had no idea, right? So Kerri was able to help me understand it. And of course we Googled it, of course, but certainly respect. I mean, respect was a big part of our relationship and our bridge building and boundaries kind of. Kerri can speak to that.
Jenny has I love that Jenny has no boundaries. And I say no boundaries loosely because she does. It's that asking of the question, right? Do you mind if I talk to you about this? But her lack of boundaries is what makes her such a great learner. And that's a great quality to have as an ally, is that curiosity and that want to understand, while also balancing your want to understand with a basic level of respect. And one of the things that made it so, I guess, natural for our friendship to blossom in this way is that we were both equally vulnerable at different points, right? And when one of us was being vulnerable, the other one was their ally. And I don't know if, Jen, you want to talk about the journey to being a lactivist, but in our own ways, we both saw each other grow and transform and, have different identities come up within us. And at points where each other was vulnerable, we were able to kind of help support that person through whatever they were going through.
Yeah, and that's just one last thing that I want to touch on. Being a mother in the workforce, I have 2 kids. One is 2 and one is 4. And, I'd like to say that they're my entire world, but they're not. I'm also a professional and I've worked really, really hard to get where I am. And they are a big part of my world, but they're not the only piece of it. So coming back to the workforce, I still wanted to maintain that professional identity. And, Kerri really helped me a lot when, you overheard a senior leader talk to somebody else and say, Jenny took advantage because she took 10 weeks of maternity leave and I only took 6. I mean, those things are very, words matter. And it was helpful to have somebody in my corner who would be like, Jenny, you've got this, you're performing, you're doing fine. Somebody to support me when, at times, it wasn't quite apparent that I was supported, right? And I certainly was in many ways, but we talk about those instances that really resonate with you or you remember. And it's human nature, when somebody hurts you or stings you, it's not easy to forget that. So it does take a lot more positive interactions to kind of bring you back up to center. And I think that Kerri really, as much as I was an ally to her, she was an ally for me at different parts of my, evolution as a woman and as a mother to find my new identity too. And I know we're running short on time, so we'll speed up our last couple slides.
One of the things from this guide to allyship that we definitely wanted to share, it's a direct quote from its author. Saying you're an ally is much easier than actually being an ally. Saying you're an ally looks good on paper, especially if you're never questioned about your inaction. That's major. And that kind of brings us to our closing thoughts. And really, we talked about what it is to be an ally. And it is all of these things, right? It's a safe space. It's someone who respects others. It's someone who has your back. It's a person who supports you. But really, being an ally, it's a verb. Allyhood is a verb. It's something we live out every day.
And it's kind of like marriage, right? Like, it is a choice. It is a choice every day. And you can either, continue to make choices and take actions that will take you to one direction or another direction, right? So we just want to leave you with, maybe if you can think about somebody who has stepped up for you or someone you love in a large or small way. It does not have to be a grand gesture, but think about, like, what are those ways that people have demonstrated to you that facets of your identity are important and they're valued and they're visible? And, everything is changing. And Kerri and I, we went down a rabbit hole last night for like 4 hours trying to figure out all the things we wanted to say. And we're so grateful that you joined us today to talk it through. But, everything is changing. And even when we wrote our abstract to be submitted for the diversity panel to be considered as a speaker, that was a few months ago, and everything changed. Our presentation changed. Everything we wanted to say was a little bit different. So really try to find your own allies and find people that will help you keep up, because it's a lot.
And so we didn't want to leave you thinking that we did this all by ourselves, because we certainly did not. Just like any good ally, we use the internet. We dug deep, and these are 3 resources that we wanted to share with you. First is the Guide to Allyship that we've cited a couple of times. There's also a website called the Anti-Oppression Network, and they have an entire repository on allyship. They're just both really solid resources. And a personal favorite, we always love the good folks at Ben & Jerry's, who have their own Guide to Allyship that was written in 2016. It's still just as relevant, if not even more relevant today.
Thanks.
Thank you guys so much.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jenny and Kerri. You guys did awesome. One thing I wanted to highlight, and if anybody has any questions that they'd like you to answer, please put that in the question and answer, and give you a couple seconds to do that. But one thing that really struck out for me, and I've heard Jenny use this the other week, that helped me understand this more. I think that's so powerful, and I've heard you both use that at some point. So I just really wanted to highlight that. I think that's a great way to bridge that gap in a question or in a situation that you don't understand the answer.
Thanks, Ben. That's a Chris Hetro special. He taught me that.
It's good, and you do it flawlessly. It's
He also tells me that I talk too much, so I'm working on that.
Don't work on that.
okay.
Keep talking.
But, anybody have any questions that they want to ask our panelists for today? I'm looking on Facebook too.
Should we add our disclaimer that we're not experts before we answer any more questions? We're just two girls living our lives, doing our best.
Not getting any. But a lot of people are saying that the presentation was awesome, and thank you.
Do you want to send snacks?
We can put your address in there.
Oh,
one question that we always get is, could we share your PowerPoint?
Yeah, please.
Absolutely.
So we'll make sure, again, that we get this up early next week. To anybody who registered on our event website, we'll send that out to. If you're watching on Facebook or after the fact and you want the PowerPoint, you can send an email to myself, ben.eaton, E-A-T-O-N, at wilkes-bear.org, and we'll get that over to you. But thank you again, Kerri and Jenny, and for everybody tuning in today. Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Bye.